I never thought I'd fall in love with someone who carried so much silence. Reed was a veteran, 7 years older than me, with hands that trembled sometimes when he thought no one was watching. We met at the community centre where I volunteered on weekends, teaching basic computer skills to anyone who needed them. He showed up one Saturday morning in October, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days, asking if I could help him set up an email account. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much, and when our eyes met for the first time, I felt something shift in my chest that I couldn't name yet. I'm Cameron, by the way. 26, working as a graphic designer in Portland, living in a studio apartment that's mostly just my desk, my bed, and about 1,000 coffee mugs I keep forgetting to wash. Before Reed, my life was pretty simple. I dated occasionally, mostly guys I met through apps who wanted something casual, nothing that ever stuck. I told myself I was fine with that I wasn't ready for anything serious. Looking back now, I think I was just scared of what serious might actually feel like. That first day, Reed sat down at the computer next to mine, and I walked him through creating an email address. His fingers moved slowly over the keyboard, hunting and pecking for each letter. He apologised for being slow, and I told him there was no rush. We had all the time in the world. That made him smile, just barely, like he wasn't used to people being patient with him. I noticed the tattoo on his forearm then, a compass rose with coordinates underneath. When he caught me looking, he pulled his sleeve down a little, not quite covering it, but close. We spent an hour together that morning. I learned he'd been back stateside for 2 years, that he was trying to figure out what came next, that he'd served 3 tours overseas and came home to find that home didn't quite fit anymore. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was talking about the weather, but I could hear the weight underneath his words. When the session ended, he thanked me, shook my hand with a grip that was firm but gentle, and left. I didn't expect to see him again, but he came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Each week he'd have some new question about technology, about navigating the internet, about how to do this or that on a computer. Some of the questions felt almost like excuses, like he could have figured them out on his own but wanted a reason to sit next to me for an hour. I didn't mind. I started looking forward to Saturdays in a way I never had before. I'd catch myself thinking about what shirt to wear, whether I should get a haircut, stupid little things that made me realise something was happening that I hadn't planned for. We started talking about more than just computers. Reed told me about growing up in a small town in eastern Oregon, a place called Hartwell that I'd never heard of. He described it with this mix of nostalgia and sadness, talking about the mountains that surrounded it, the river that ran through the centre of town, the diner where everyone knew everyone else's business. He'd left for the military at 18 and hadn't been back since. 20 years, he said. 20 years of avoiding the place that made him. I told him about my own life, about growing up in the suburbs, about coming out to my parents when I was 22, and having them respond with awkward acceptance that eventually became genuine support. About my kid sister, who was cooler than I'd ever be. About my job and my tiny apartment and my collection of half-dead succulents that I kept trying and failing to keep alive. Reed listened to everything like it mattered, like my mundane little stories were worth his full attention. No one had ever listened to me like that before. It was mid-November when things shifted. We'd been meeting for about 6 weeks, and Reed asked if I wanted to grab coffee after the session. My heart did this stupid jumping thing, and I said yes, trying to sound casual. We walked to a cafe 2 blocks away, and he bought us both coffee, waving away my attempt to pay. We sat in a corner booth, and for the first time I saw him truly relax. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, and he talked more freely than he ever had before. He told me about the nightmares, about waking up at 3 a.m, convinced he was still in the desert, still hearing explosions that weren't there. About the therapy he'd started and started again. About how hard it was to connect with people who hadn't seen what he'd seen, who couldn't understand why crowded spaces made him anxious, or why sudden loud noises made him flinch. He said all of this while staring into his coffee cup like he couldn't bear to see my reaction. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just did it. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Surprise, maybe. Hope, definitely. His hand turned over under mine, our palms pressing together and neither of us moved. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, just holding hands across a coffee shop table while the world continued around us. That's when I knew. That's when I understood that what I felt for Reed wasn't just friendship or attraction or curiosity. It was bigger than that, deeper than that. It was the kind of feeling that changes everything, that makes you want to be braver than you've ever been, that makes you willing to risk getting hurt because the alternative is not having this person in your life. We started seeing each other outside of Saturdays. Reed would text me during the week, short messages asking how my day was going or sharing a photo of something that made him think of me. A sunset over the city, a dog he saw at the park, a quote from a book he was reading. We'd meet for dinner, for walks along the waterfront, for quiet evenings at my apartment where we'd watch movies or just talk for hours. He kissed me for the first time on a Tuesday night in December, standing in my doorway as he was about to leave. It was gentle and tentative, like he was afraid I might pull away. I didn't pull away. I kissed him back and felt everything inside me click into place. Being with Reed was different from anything I'd experienced before. He was careful with me, almost too careful sometimes, like he was constantly worried about doing something wrong. I had to learn to read his silences, to understand that when he went quiet, it didn't mean he was pulling away, just that he needed time to process whatever he was feeling. He had to learn that I needed words sometimes, that I couldn't always guess what was going on in his head, that it was okay to be vulnerable with me. We fell into a rhythm. He'd stay over at my place most nights, and I'd wake up to find him already awake, watching me sleep with this soft expression that made me feel cherished in a way I'd never felt before. We'd make breakfast together, moving around my tiny kitchen like we'd been doing it for years. He'd leave for his job at a warehouse, and I'd go to my office, and we'd text throughout the day like teenagers with a crush. At night, we'd come back together and it felt like coming home. It was late January when Reed first mentioned Hartwell again. We were lying in bed, my head on his chest, his fingers running through my hair. He said it quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. He said he'd been thinking about going back, about finally facing the place he'd been avoiding for 2 decades. He said it scared him, the idea of walking those streets again, of seeing how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. He said he didn't know if he could do it alone. I lifted my head to look at him. In the dim light from the street, I could see the vulnerability in his face, the fear and the longing mixed together. I asked him if he wanted me to come with him. He didn't answer right away. His hands stilled in my hair, and I could feel his heartbeat quicken under my ear. Then he said yes. He said he'd been wanting to ask but didn't know if it was too much, too soon, too heavy a thing to put on me. I told him nothing with him felt too heavy. I told him I wanted to be there for him, whatever that looked like. We planned the trip for February. Reed wanted to go during the week when fewer people would be around, when he could slip in and out without too much attention. He took 3 days off work and I did the same. The night before we left, he was restless, pacing my apartment, picking things up and putting them down without really seeing them. I pulled him onto the couch and held him, and eventually he stopped moving and just let me hold him. He whispered that he didn't know why this mattered so much, why he needed to do this. I whispered back that sometimes we need to make peace with our past before we can fully step into our future. The drive to Hartwell took 4 hours. Reed was quiet for most of it, his hand resting on my thigh as I drove, his eyes fixed on the landscape passing by. As we got closer, I could see the tension building in him. His jaw was tight, his breathing shallow. I asked if he was okay, and he nodded, but I could tell he wasn't. When we finally crossed into Hartwell, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for miles. The town was smaller than I'd imagined. One main street with a handful of shops, a post office, a library and the diner Reed had mentioned. Mountains rose up on all sides, still topped with snow even though spring was trying to break through. The river ran alongside the main road, swollen with snowmelt. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely kind of way. Reed directed me to a motel on the edge of town, a place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. We checked in, and the woman behind the desk did a double take when she saw Reed, like she almost recognized him, but couldn't quite place him. We dropped our bags in the room and stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what to do next. Reed looked lost, like now that he was here, he didn't know why he'd come. I took his hand and suggested we just walk around. No agenda, no plan, just see where his feet took him. He nodded and laced his fingers through mine. We walked down Main Street as the afternoon light started to fade. Reed pointed out places he remembered. The hardware store where he'd bought his first pocket knife, the park where he'd played Little League, the corner where he'd gotten into his first fight. He talked about his parents, both gone now, his dad from a heart attack 10 years ago, and his mum from cancer just 3 years back. He'd come home for the funerals but hadn't stayed, couldn't stay. He talked about his older brother who still lived here somewhere, though they hadn't spoken in years. He talked about being a kid in this town, about knowing from a young age that he was different, that he didn't fit the mould of what a boy from Hartwell was supposed to be. We stopped in front of a house on a quiet street. Reed stood there, staring at it, his hand gripping mine so tight it almost hurt. He said this was where he grew up. The house looked tired, the paint peeling, the yard overgrown. Different people lived there now, he said. Different lives happening in the rooms where he used to sleep, used to dream about getting out, used to lie awake wondering if anyone would ever understand him. I asked if he wanted to knock on the door, maybe see inside. He shook his head. He said the house didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that he'd survived it, survived this whole town and everything it represented. We went to the diner for dinner. A few heads turned when we walked in, and I could see people trying to figure out who Reed was, their eyes narrowing in recognition. The waitress was a woman about Reed's age, and when she came to take our order, she gasped and said his name like a question. Reed smiled, a real smile, and they talked for a few minutes about people they'd both known, about where life had taken them. She didn't mention us holding hands across the table, didn't react to the obvious intimacy between us, and I was grateful for that. After dinner, we drove to a spot Reed remembered from high school, a clearing up in the mountains where kids used to go to party. We parked and got out, and the view took my breath away. The whole town spread out below us, lights starting to twinkle as night fell, the river a dark ribbon cutting through the centre. Reed stood at the edge of the clearing and I stood beside him, our shoulders touching. He said this was where he used to come to think, to dream about the person he might become if he could just get away. He said he used to stand here and imagine a life where he could be himself, where he could love who he wanted to love, where he didn't have to hide. I turned to face him, and in the fading light I could see tears on his cheeks. I'd never seen him cry before. I reached up and wiped them away with my thumb, and he caught my hand and held it against his face. He said coming back here with me, being able to stand in this place with someone he loved, it meant everything. It meant that kid who used to dream here had been right to hope. It meant that life had turned out better than he'd ever imagined possible. That was the first time either of us had said love out loud. The word hung in the air between us, huge and terrifying and perfect. I said it back. I said I loved him too, loved him more than I knew how to express, loved him in a way that felt like it had always been there, just waiting for him to walk into that community centre and ask for help with email. We kissed there on that mountain, and it felt like we were sealing something, making a promise to each other and to the universe that this was real. This was forever. We spent the next day exploring more of Hartwell. Reed was lighter, like something had loosened in him overnight. We went to the cemetery and visited his parents' graves. He introduced me to them, told them about me, told them he was happy. We stopped by the library and Reed showed me the section where he used to hide as a kid, reading books about places far away, about people who were different and brave and free. We got coffee at a small cafe that hadn't existed when Reed lived here, and we sat outside in the weak February sun just being together. On our last evening, Reed wanted to drive out to the river. There was a spot he remembered, a place where the water pooled and slowed, where he used to go fishing with his dad. We found it as the sun was setting, the sky turning pink and orange and purple. We sat on the bank, and Reed skipped stones across the water like he probably had 1,000 times as a kid. He told me that he'd been so afraid to come back here, afraid it would drag him down into old pain and old shame. But being here with me, he said, had transformed it. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was a man who'd survived war and trauma and loss, a man who'd found love despite everything, a man who could finally make peace with where he came from. I asked him if he thought he'd come back again. He thought about it for a long time, watching the river flow past. Then he said maybe, but only with me. He said Hartwell meant nothing to him alone, that all these places were just places, just buildings and streets and memories that had no power over him anymore. But with me, they became something else. They became part of our story, part of the journey that brought us together. He said everywhere meant more with me beside him. We drove back to Portland the next morning. Reed was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Peaceful. Settled. He held my hand the whole way, sometimes bringing it to his lips to kiss my knuckles, sometimes just holding it against his chest. When we got back to my apartment, we unpacked our bags and fell into bed, exhausted but content. Reed pulled me close and whispered thank you. Thank you for coming with him. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for loving him. That was 4 months ago. Reed moved in officially last month, bringing his few belongings and somehow making my tiny apartment feel like it had always been waiting for both of us. We're talking about getting a bigger place, maybe a little house with a yard where we can get a dog. Reed wants to go back to school, maybe study social work, help other veterans navigate the transition home. I'm working on a new project at my job, something that actually excites me for the first time in years. We're building a life together, piece by piece, day by day. Sometimes I think about that first Saturday when Reed walked into the community centre, about how close I came to not being there that day, about how different my life would be if our paths hadn't crossed. It terrifies me and amazes me in equal measure. Love is like that, I guess. It's chance and choice and courage all mixed together. It's saying yes when someone asks if you'll visit their hometown with them, even when you don't fully understand why it matters so much. It's showing up for someone even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It's being willing to witness someone's pain and their healing, to hold space for all the complicated pieces of who they are. Reed still has nightmares sometimes. He still has days when the weight of everything he's been through feels too heavy. But he doesn't carry it alone anymore. We carry it together. And on the good days, which are most days now, we laugh and cook dinner and watch terrible reality TV and make plans for the future. We talk about maybe going back to Hartwell next year, maybe during the summer when the mountains are green and the river is calm. We talk about all the places we want to see together, all the adventures still waiting for us. Last week, Reed surprised me with something. He'd gotten a tattoo, his second one. It was small, on the inside of his wrist where he could always see it. My name in simple script with coordinates underneath. I asked him what the coordinates were for, and he smiled that soft smile I love so much. He said they're the coordinates of the community centre where we met. He said it's the place where his real life started, where he found his way home. I cried, and he held me, and I thought about how lucky I am, how impossibly lucky we both are to have found each other in this vast, chaotic world. I never thought I'd fall in love with someone who carried so much silence. But Reed taught me that silence can be sacred, that it can hold more meaning than 1,000 words. He taught me that love isn't always easy or simple, that sometimes it requires patience and understanding, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. He taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's the feeling you get when someone sees all of you and chooses to stay. He taught me that I'm braver than I thought I was, that I'm capable of showing up for someone in ways I never imagined. And I hope I've taught him something too. I hope I've shown him that he's worthy of love, that his past doesn't define his future, that he deserves all the happiness in the world. I hope I've given him a safe place to land, a hand to hold, a heart that's completely and irrevocably his. Because that's what love is, really. It's choosing someone every single day. It's visiting their hometown even when it scares them. It's being the person they call when the nightmares come. It's building a life together one small moment at a time, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Total char count, 23,847.